The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her tactical gear one final time. She had been working with SEAL Team Alpha for 3 months now, serving as their intelligence officer and translator. The local dialects came naturally to her, a skill that had made her invaluable to the team's operations in this remote region. Commander Jake Morrison watched her through his binoculars from their concealed position on the ridge. Sarah was preparing to descend into the valley below, where a small village lay nestled between 2 steep canyon walls. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was hiding there, but the village was heavily guarded by Taliban fighters who knew the terrain better than anyone. "Chen, you sure about this?" Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got eyes on at least 15 hostiles down there, and that's just what we can see." Sarah's voice came back steady and calm. "Copy that, Commander. The villagers trust me. I've been building relationships with them for weeks. They'll talk to me, but not to a full military presence. This is our best shot at getting solid intel on the target's location." Petty Officer First Class. Tony Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably beside Morrison. "Boss, I don't like it. Too many variables. Too many things that can go wrong." Morrison understood Rodriguez's concern. Sarah was brave, almost to a fault. She had volunteered for this mission despite knowing the risks. The village was essentially a fortress, with only one way in and one way out through the narrow canyon pass. If things went sideways, extraction would be nearly impossible. The plan was straightforward on paper. Sarah would enter the village posing as an aid worker, something she had done successfully before. She would meet with the village elder, a man named Khalil who had shown sympathy to American forces in private conversations. Through him, she hoped to gather information about the Taliban commander they were hunting. "Remember, Chen," Morrison said into his radio, "you've got 30 minutes max. Any longer, and we have to assume you're compromised." Sarah began her descent down the rocky slope, her civilian clothes and small medical bag helping her maintain her cover. The SEAL team watched helplessly as she became smaller and smaller, eventually disappearing behind the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the village. The village itself was a collection of mud brick houses clustered around a small central square. Smoke rose from cooking fires and the sound of children playing echoed off the canyon walls. To most observers it looked peaceful, almost idyllic, but Morrison and his team knew better. Their intelligence indicated that this village was a staging point for attacks against coalition forces. As Sarah approached the village outskirts, she could feel eyes watching her. Taliban fighters were positioned strategically throughout the settlement, but they were trying to remain inconspicuous. She had studied satellite images of the village for hours, memorizing every building, every possible hiding spot, every escape route. Not that there were many options for escape. An old woman grinding grain in front of her house looked up as Sarah approached. Sarah greeted her in the local dialect, explaining that she was there to check on the health of the village children. The woman's weathered face showed suspicion at first, but Sarah's fluent Pashto and genuine concern seemed to ease her wariness. "The elder Khalil is in the mosque," the woman said, pointing toward the center of the village. "But there are dangerous men here today. You should be careful, sister." Sarah thanked the woman and continued toward the mosque, her heart rate increasing slightly. The warning confirmed what the SEAL team already suspected. This was not going to be a routine intelligence-gathering mission. Up on the ridge, Morrison watched through his scope as Sarah disappeared into the maze of narrow alleyways that led to the village center. The team had positioned themselves with overlapping fields of fire, but the distance was extreme, and civilian structures blocked most of their sight lines into the village itself. Overwatch 1. "This is Alpha 6, Morrison spoke into his radio to the sniper team positioned on the opposite ridge. "Do you have eyes on our package?" "Negative, Alpha 6, too many obstructions. We can see the village perimeter, but not the interior." Rodriguez checked his watch. "She's been inside for 8 minutes, boss." Morrison felt the familiar knot of tension in his stomach that came with sending someone into danger while being unable to provide immediate support. Sarah was capable and well-trained, but she was also walking into what could easily become a trap. Inside the village, Sarah made her way through the narrow streets, noting the positions of armed men who tried to look like ordinary villagers. Their weapons were concealed, but their body language gave them away. They were tense, alert, ready for trouble. The mosque was a simple stone building with a small minaret. As Sarah approached, She saw Khalil sitting in the shade of the entrance, speaking quietly with two other men. When he saw her, his expression showed both surprise and concern. "My daughter," he said in Pashto, rising to greet her. "This is not a good day for visitors." "There are dangerous men in our village," Sarah smiled, but her eyes conveyed urgency. "I understand, Uncle. But I have come far to speak with you. Perhaps we could talk privately?" Khalil glanced nervously at the other men, who were watching the conversation with obvious interest. "Yes, child. Come inside." As they entered the mosque, Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. More men were emerging from buildings around the square, and they were all armed. Her training kicked in, and she began mentally cataloging escape routes and potential weapons. But the reality was sobering. She was surrounded, outnumbered, and completely cut off from help. On the ridge, Morrison was growing more anxious by the minute. "Chen, report your status," he said into his radio. There was no response. "Chen, do you copy?" Still nothing. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars. "Boss, we've got movement in the village. Looks like they're setting up some kind of perimeter." Morrison's jaw tightened. Something had gone wrong. Sarah was in trouble, and his team was too far away to help. The village was turning into a fortress, and his intelligence officer was trapped inside with no way out. Inside the mosque, Sarah followed Khalil toward the prayer area, while her mind raced through possible scenarios. The old man moved slowly, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he gestured for her to sit on the carpet-covered floor. The interior was cool and dim, offering temporary refuge from both the heat outside and the watchful eyes of the armed men. "They came this morning," Khalil whispered, glancing toward the entrance. "Many men with guns. They said they were waiting for someone important, someone the Americans want badly." Sarah's pulse quickened. This confirmed their intelligence, but it also meant she was walking into the exact situation they had hoped to avoid. "Do you know who they are waiting for, Uncle?" Khalil's eyes darted nervously toward the doorway again. "Commander Yassin. He is supposed to arrive before evening prayers. The men outside, they are his advance guard." Commander Yassin was exactly the high-value target Morrison's team had been tracking for weeks. He was responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, and had been moving from village to village, always staying one step ahead of capture. If he was coming here, this was their chance to either capture or eliminate him. But Sarah realized with growing dread that she was now trapped in the middle of what would soon become a war zone. On the ridge, Morrison made a difficult decision. "Rodriguez, get on the satellite phone. Contact base and request immediate backup. We're going to need more firepower if we're going to get Chen out of there." "What about the mission?" Rodriguez asked, already reaching for the communications equipment. "The mission just changed," Morrison replied grimly. "Primary objective is now to extract our intelligence officer alive." Sergeant Mike Thompson, the team's explosives expert, studied the village layout through his scope. "Commander, even with backup, getting into that village is going to be a nightmare. It's a natural fortress, and they've got the high ground on the exit route." Morrison knew Thompson was right. The village was positioned perfectly for defense, with steep cliffs on three sides and only one narrow canyon leading in and out. It was exactly the kind of terrain that favored the defenders, especially when those defenders knew every rock and hiding place. "Overwatch 1, this is Alpha 6, Morrison called to the sniper team. "I need you to identify every possible fighting position in that village. If we're going in, I need to know exactly what we're up against." Back in the mosque, Sarah was trying to process the information Khalil had given her while planning her next move. She needed to get word to Morrison about Yassin's arrival, but her radio communications were being jammed. Every time she tried to transmit, she got nothing but static. "Uncle," she said carefully, "is there another way out of the village? Perhaps a path that the armed men do not know about?" Khalil shook his head sadly. "Only the main road through the canyon. But child, I fear you may not be able to leave at all. These men, they are suspicious of everyone. They have been asking questions about strangers, about anyone who might be working with the Americans." Sarah's blood ran cold. If the Taliban fighters suspected her true identity, she was in immediate danger. Worse, if they discovered she was working with the SEALs, they might use her as bait to draw Morrison's team into a trap. Outside the mosque, she could hear voices getting louder and more agitated. Someone was giving orders in rapid Pashto, and she caught enough words to understand that they were discussing security arrangements for Yassin's arrival. "Uncle, I need to leave now," Sarah said, starting to stand. "Thank you for the information." Khalil grabbed her arm gently but firmly. Wait, child. I hear vehicles coming. If you go outside now, they will see you leaving the mosque. It will raise questions. Sarah froze, listening carefully. Indeed, she could hear the distant rumble of truck engines echoing through the canyon. More fighters were arriving, probably Yasin's main security detail. On the ridge, Morrison heard the vehicles too. Count the trucks, he ordered his team. I need to know how many we're dealing with. Petty Officer Second Class Danny Kim, who was monitoring the village through a high-powered telescope, began his count. I see 4 vehicles, boss. Pickup trucks, each with about 6 to 8 fighters. That's at least 30 more hostiles, plus whatever they already had in the village. Morrison felt the situation spiraling beyond their control. What had started as a simple intelligence-gathering mission was turning into a potential hostage situation with overwhelming enemy numbers. Any word from base on that backup? Morrison asked Rodriguez. Still waiting for confirmation, boss. But even if they approve it, we're looking at least 2 hours before air support arrives. 2 hours might as well be 2 days. If Sarah was discovered, she could be dead in minutes. Inside the mosque, Sarah watched through a small window as the trucks pulled into the village square. Armed men jumped out immediately, taking defensive positions around the perimeter. They moved with military precision, clearly well-trained and experienced fighters. These are not local Taliban, Khalil whispered, his voice filled with fear. These are foreign fighters, Arabs maybe. Very dangerous men. Sarah recognized the significance of this information. Foreign fighters were typically more fanatical and less likely to show mercy to prisoners, especially American prisoners. Her situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. One of the new arrivals, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, began giving orders to the other fighters. Sarah watched him carefully, committing his appearance to memory. This could be Yasin himself arriving early. Commander Yasin? She asked Khalil quietly. The old man peered through the window and nodded grimly. Yes, that is him. He is early. Sarah realized that her mission had suddenly become much more complex. She now had positive identification of their primary target, but she was trapped with no way to communicate this information to Morrison's team. Worse, if she was discovered, the intelligence would die with her. Outside, Yasin was inspecting the defensive positions his men had established. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never been successfully challenged, someone who believed himself to be untouchable in his mountain stronghold. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She had to find a way to get a message to Morrison, even if it meant taking enormous risks. The opportunity to capture or eliminate Yasin might not come again. Uncle, she said to Khalil, I need your help. Khalil's weathered face showed deep concern as he studied Sarah's determined expression. The old man had survived decades of conflict in these mountains, and he recognized the look of someone preparing to do something extremely dangerous. What kind of help, my daughter? He asked quietly, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Sarah pulled a small mirror from her medical bag, the kind doctors use to examine patients' throats. But she had a different purpose in mind. I need you to create a distraction, something to draw attention away from the mosque entrance for just a few minutes. This is madness, Khalil whispered. If they catch you trying to signal your friends, they will kill us both. If I don't signal my friends, Sarah replied, many more people will die. Yasin is planning attacks on coalition forces. Innocent people will suffer. Outside, they could hear Yasin's men continuing to fortify their positions. The sound of weapons being loaded and equipment being moved around the village square created a constant background noise that would help mask Sarah's activities. On the ridge, Morrison was growing desperate. His team had been in position for over an hour, and Sarah had been silent for 45 minutes. Every instinct told him that something had gone terribly wrong. Boss, Rodriguez said urgently, I'm picking up increased radio chatter from the village. They're definitely expecting something big. Morrison lowered his binoculars and looked at his team. These were some of the most elite soldiers in the world, trained for the most difficult missions imaginable. But even they had limits, and the tactical situation was about as bad as it could get. Thompson, how long would it take you to rig an explosion on that canyon wall? Morrison asked, pointing to a section of rock face that overlooked the village's only exit route. Thompson studied the terrain through his scope. Maybe 20 minutes to get down there and place the charges. But boss, if we blow that wall, we'll trap everyone in the village, including Chen. I know, Morrison replied grimly. But if we can't get her out, at least we can make sure Yasin doesn't get out either. It was a terrible calculation, but Morrison had to consider the bigger picture. Yasin was responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers and countless Afghan civilians. If Sarah's sacrifice could prevent future attacks, it might be worth it. But the thought of abandoning one of his people made him sick to his stomach. In the mosque, Sarah had positioned herself near a small window that faced toward the ridge where she knew Morrison's team was waiting. She held the small mirror ready, angling it to catch the afternoon sunlight that was streaming through the opening. Uncle, when I give you the signal, I need you to go outside and ask one of the guards for water for the mosque's washing area. Keep them talking as long as you can. Khalil nodded reluctantly. And then what, child? Even if you signal your friends, how will you escape? The village is surrounded by Yasin's men. Sarah had been thinking about that exact problem. The truth was she probably couldn't escape. But she could still complete her mission. I may not escape, Uncle. But my friends need to know that Yasin is here. It may be their only chance to stop him. The old man's eyes filled with tears. You are very brave, my daughter. But also very foolish. Sarah managed a small smile. Sometimes bravery and foolishness look exactly the same. She waited for the right moment, listening to the sounds from outside. Yasin was giving a speech to his fighters, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls of the mosque. He was talking about upcoming operations, about striking back at the Americans who dared to enter their territory. This was it. Sarah nodded to Khalil, who took a deep breath and walked toward the mosque entrance. She heard him call out to one of the guards, asking about water for the ritual washing area. Immediately, Sarah began flashing the mirror toward the ridge, using the basic Morse code that all military personnel learned. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS. Then she began spelling out letters. YASSINHERENOW. On the ridge, Kim suddenly grabbed Morrison's arm. Boss, I'm seeing light flashes from the mosque. Regular pattern looks like Morse code. Morrison snatched the binoculars and focused on the mosque. There it was, a small glinting light flashing in a deliberate pattern. Rodriguez, you still remember your Morse code? Yes, sir. I see it too. SOS then. YASSINHERENOW. Morrison felt a mixture of relief and dread. Sarah was alive and had identified their target. But she was also confirming their worst fears. Yasin was in the village right now, surrounded by heavy security. She's not done, Rodriguez said, still watching the flashes. NEED. EXTRACTION. SAP. Morrison made a quick decision. Thompson, belay that canyon wall idea. We're going in after her. Boss, that's suicide, Rodriguez protested. We're outnumbered at least 10 to 1 and they have the defensive advantage. I don't care about the odds, Morrison replied. We don't leave our people behind, ever. In the village, Sarah's signaling was interrupted by angry voices outside the mosque. Khalil's distraction had worked for a few minutes, but now the guards were getting suspicious about why the old man needed so much water. The woman, she heard one of the guards saying in Arabic. Where is the woman who came to see the elder? Sarah's blood turned to ice. They knew about her. Somehow her presence had been reported to Yasin's security team. She quickly put away the mirror and moved toward the back of the mosque, looking for any other exit. But the building was simple and solid, with only the main entrance and a few small windows too high to reach. Khalil appeared in the doorway, his face pale with fear. They are asking about you, he whispered urgently. Someone told them about the American woman who speaks our language. Sarah realized that her cover was completely blown. There was no point in pretending to be an aid worker anymore. Uncle, you need to get away from me. If they find you helping me, they will kill you. I will not abandon you, child, Khalil said firmly. This is God's house. They will not harm you here. But even as he spoke, they could hear boots approaching the mosque entrance. Heavy military boots that belonged to Yasin's fighters. Search every building, came a voice in accented English. Find the American spy. Sarah pulled out the small pistol she had concealed in her medical bag. It was a compact 9mm with only 1 spare magazine. Against Yasin's small army, it wouldn't be much help, but at least she wouldn't go down without a fight. On the ridge, Morrison was already moving. Alpha team, we're going in. Thompson, you and Kim provide covering fire from here. Rodriguez, you're with me. What's the plan, boss? Rodriguez asked, checking his weapon. Morrison's jaw was set in a hard line. Simple. We go down there, get Chen, and get out. Anyone who tries to stop us gets put down. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Sarah was trapped with nowhere to run, and Yasin's men were closing in on her position. The next few minutes would determine whether any of them lived to see another day. The first fighter to enter the mosque was a young man with nervous eyes and sweaty palms gripping his AK-47. Sarah pressed herself against the wall behind a stone pillar, her pistol ready but held low. She could hear at least 3 more sets of boots approaching the entrance. Khalil stepped forward to meet the young fighter, speaking rapidly in Pashto. "Peace be upon you, my son. This is a house of worship. Why do you bring weapons here?" The fighter ignored the old man and began scanning the interior of the mosque methodically. His eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the dim lighting after the bright afternoon sun outside, giving Sarah a temporary advantage. "Where is the American woman?" the fighter demanded in broken English, clearly hoping to provoke a response. Sarah remained silent and motionless. Every second they didn't spot her was another second for Morrison's team to get closer. Through the small window, she could see more fighters spreading out across the village, searching other buildings systematically. On the hillside, Morrison and Rodriguez were making their way down the rocky slope as quickly as stealth would allow. They had covered about half the distance to the village perimeter, using natural cover and years of training to remain invisible to the sentries posted around the canyon entrance. "Movement on the south ridge," came Kim's voice through Morrison's earpiece. "Looks like they've got spotters up there too." Morrison cursed silently. Yasin's security was more thorough than they had expected. The Taliban commander hadn't survived this long by taking chances, and he clearly understood the value of controlling the high ground around his temporary base. "Thompson, can you take out those spotters without alerting the whole village?" Morrison whispered into his radio. "Negative, boss. Too much distance for a quiet kill. If I take the shot, everyone's going to know we're here." Morrison had to make another impossible decision. Wait for the perfect opportunity that might never come, or act now while they still had some element of surprise. In the mosque, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. 2 more fighters had entered, and they were conducting a more thorough search. One of them was testing the walls for hidden spaces, while another was examining the prayer rugs for any sign of recent disturbance. "Check behind the pillars," the first fighter ordered his companions. Sarah knew her hiding spot wouldn't conceal her much longer. She made eye contact with Khalil, who understood what she was about to do. The old man gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "There!" Khalil suddenly shouted, pointing toward the opposite side of the mosque from where Sarah was hidden. "I saw someone move behind that pillar." The fighters immediately rushed toward where Khalil had pointed, giving Sarah a few precious seconds. She moved quickly but quietly toward the mosque entrance, hoping to slip out while they were distracted. But as she reached the doorway, she came face to face with Commander Yasin himself. The Taliban leader was exactly as intelligence reports had described him: tall, lean, with piercing dark eyes and the distinctive scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction, like a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, United States Navy," Yasin said in perfect English. "I have been looking forward to meeting you." Sarah's mind raced. How did he know her name and rank? They had been so careful about operational security, keeping her involvement with the SEAL team classified at the highest levels. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah said, trying to maintain her cover, even though she knew it was useless. Yasin smiled coldly. "Please, Lieutenant, we have been monitoring your radio communications for weeks. Your encryption is good, but not perfect. We know about your SEAL team on the ridge. We know about your mission to capture or kill me." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. They had been walking into a trap from the very beginning. Yasin had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. "In fact," Yasin continued, "your presence here serves my purposes perfectly. Your SEAL friends will come for you, and when they do, we will be ready for them." On the hillside, Morrison had no idea that their communications had been compromised. He and Rodriguez were now within 200 meters of the village perimeter, close enough to hear voices and see individual fighters moving between buildings. "Boss," Rodriguez whispered, "something doesn't feel right about this. They're too relaxed for a security detail protecting a high-value target." Morrison had the same feeling, but Sarah was in immediate danger. Whether it was a trap or not, they couldn't abandon her. "We proceed with the mission. Chen is our priority." Back in the mosque, Yasin was enjoying his moment of triumph. "Your government will pay handsomely for your return, Lieutenant. But first, you are going to help me send a message to your SEAL team." He pulled out a small radio, the same frequency that Morrison's team used for communications. "Commander Morrison, this is Commander Yasin. I believe I have something that belongs to you." Morrison's blood ran cold as he heard the transmission. Rodriguez grabbed his arm, both men frozen in place on the rocky hillside. "I propose a trade," Yasin's voice continued through their radios. "You're Lieutenant Chen for safe passage out of this valley. You have 10 minutes to decide." Morrison switched to a different radio channel, hoping their backup frequencies were still secure. "Thompson, Kim, do you copy?" "Roger, boss," came Thompson's immediate response. "We heard it too." "Options?" Morrison asked grimly. "Not good, boss. If they've been monitoring our primary frequency, they probably know our positions, our numbers, everything." Morrison realized that their entire mission had been compromised from the start, but that didn't change his responsibility to his team member. "We're not negotiating with terrorists. We're getting Chen back." In the mosque, Sarah was thinking along the same lines. She knew Morrison well enough to predict his response to Yasin's offer. The SEAL commander would never leave one of his people behind, even if it meant walking into an obvious trap. "He won't make a deal with you," Sarah told Yasin. "And you're fooling yourself if you think you can just walk away from here." Yasin's expression darkened. "Perhaps you underestimate your value to him. Let us find out." He spoke rapidly in Arabic to one of his fighters, who immediately left the mosque at a run. Within minutes, Sarah could hear increased activity throughout the village. Weapons were being positioned, defensive positions were being reinforced. Yasin was preparing for war. "Your friends have 8 minutes left to decide," Yasin informed Sarah. "After that, we will demonstrate what happens to American spies who trespass in our territory." Sarah looked at Khalil, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the mosque throughout the exchange. The old man's face showed resignation and acceptance. He had seen too much violence in his lifetime, and he recognized the signs of impending disaster. On the hillside, Morrison was making calculations of his own. Even with backup en route, they were looking at overwhelming odds. But he had never lost a team member in 15 years of operations, and he wasn't about to start now. "Rodriguez, we're going in," Morrison said firmly. "Full assault, no holding back." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the implications. "Boss, if we do this, we might not make it out." Morrison checked his weapon one final time. "Then we make sure Chen does." The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every bit of training, courage, and determination that both sides possessed. In 7 minutes, the mountain valley would erupt in violence that would determine the fate of everyone trapped within its walls. Morrison and Rodriguez moved through the rocky terrain like shadows, their years of training evident in every carefully placed step. They had abandoned any pretense of a covert extraction. This was now a direct assault mission with minimal backup and maximum risk. "Thompson, Kim, we need covering fire in 3 minutes," Morrison whispered into his radio, hoping their secondary frequency was still secure. "Target the fighters on the village perimeter, but watch for civilians." "Copy that, boss," came Thompson's response. "We'll give you the best show we can from up here." In the mosque, Yasin was growing impatient. He had expected Morrison to respond to his ultimatum by now, either accepting the trade or attempting some desperate rescue mission. The silence was making him suspicious. "Perhaps your commander does not value your life as much as you believed," Yasin said to Sarah, though his tone suggested he didn't believe his own words. Sarah remained quiet, knowing that Morrison was planning something. The SEAL team leader was methodical and brilliant, and he wouldn't charge blindly into a trap without having some kind of advantage. What Sarah didn't know was that Morrison had no advantage except surprise and determination. He was essentially betting everything on their ability to move fast enough and hit hard enough to extract her before Yasin's superior numbers could respond. Effectively, Yasin walked to the mosque entrance and surveyed his defensive positions. His fighters were well placed and alert, but they were also expecting a negotiation rather than a direct assault. That expectation might be the only edge Morrison's team would have. 5 minutes, Yasin called out to his men in Arabic. If the Americans do not respond, we execute the prisoner and prepare to move out. Morrison heard the transmission through his captured radio equipment and knew their time was running out. He and Rodriguez had reached the edge of the village and were concealed behind a low stone wall that separated the settlement from the surrounding scrubland. "Rodriguez, you take the left flank," Morrison whispered. "I'll go straight up the middle toward the mosque. When Thompson opens fire, we move fast and we don't stop for anything." Rodriguez nodded, checking his ammunition one final time. They were carrying everything they had, but it still might not be enough against the 40-plus fighters now positioned throughout the village. On the ridge, Thompson was setting up for what might be the most important shots of his military career. His M24 sniper rifle was loaded and zeroed, but the distance was extreme and the targets were partially concealed. Kim was beside him with a spotting scope, calculating wind speed and elevation adjustments. 30 seconds. "Boss?" Thompson's voice crackled through Morrison's earpiece. In the mosque, Sarah was preparing for whatever was about to happen. She had palmed a small knife from her medical kit. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Khalil caught her eye and nodded toward a loose stone in the wall behind the main pillar. Sarah realized the old man was showing her a potential hiding place or escape route, but Sarah had no intention of hiding. When Morrison's assault began, she planned to create as much chaos as possible from inside the mosque. Yasin's attention would be divided between defending against the external attack and controlling his prisoner. "Time's up," Yasin announced, raising his radio. "Commander Morrison, you have failed your subordinate. She dies now and her blood is on your hands." At that exact moment, Thompson's rifle cracked from the ridge. The bullet took out the fighter positioned at the village's main entrance, dropping him instantly and creating the diversion Morrison needed. Rodriguez immediately opened fire on the left flank positions while Morrison sprinted toward the mosque, his assault rifle chattering as he advanced. The village exploded into chaos. Yasin's fighters, caught off guard by the sudden violence, scrambled to respond to threats from multiple directions. Some took cover and returned fire toward the ridge, while others tried to establish defensive positions around the mosque. Inside the mosque, Sarah moved the instant she heard Thompson's shot. Yasin spun around, reaching for his sidearm, but Sarah was already in motion. She drove her small knife toward his weapon hand, hoping to disarm him or at least disrupt his aim. Yasin was faster than she expected. He deflected her attack and backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling across the prayer rugs. But the few seconds of confusion gave Morrison the opening he needed. The SEAL commander burst through the mosque entrance just as Yasin was drawing his pistol. Morrison's training took over, and he put 3 round center mass into the Taliban leader before Yasin could complete his draw. Commander Yasin, the man responsible for dozens of attacks on coalition forces, collapsed among the prayer rugs of the village mosque. His reign of terror was over. "Jen, are you hit?" Morrison asked urgently, helping Sarah to her feet. "I'm okay," she replied, though her face was already swelling from Yasin's blow. "Boss, this whole thing was a setup. They've been monitoring our communications." "I figured that out," Morrison said grimly. "That's why we're leaving right now." Outside the mosque, the firefight was intensifying. Rodriguez had eliminated several fighters on the left flank, but was now pinned down behind a mud brick wall. Return fire from the remaining Taliban fighters was accurate and heavy, chipping away at his cover with each burst. "Rodriguez, status report." Morrison called into his radio while scanning the mosque for additional threats. "I'm good for now, boss, but I can't move from this position. Too much incoming fire." Thompson's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Boss, I count at least 20 hostiles still active. They're starting to coordinate their response. You need to move now before they surround the mosque." Morrison knew Thompson was right. Yasin's fighters were disciplined and well-trained. The initial shock of the assault was wearing off, and they were beginning to establish overlapping fields of fire that would make escape nearly impossible. Sarah was checking Yasin's body for intelligence materials when she found something that made her blood run cold. "Boss, look at this," she said, holding up a detailed map of the surrounding area. The map showed not just their current position, but also the locations of Morrison's team members marked with red X's. They knew exactly where we were, Morrison realized. This whole thing was designed to draw us in. Then why didn't they just attack us on the ridge? Sarah asked. Morrison studied the map more carefully and saw the answer. Because they wanted us alive. Look at these markings. They had capture teams positioned to take us prisoner, not kill us. The implications were terrifying. If Yasin had succeeded in capturing the entire SEAL team, the intelligence value would have been enormous. Coalition operational plans, communication codes, personnel information, all of it would have been compromised. But Yasin was dead now, and his carefully laid trap was falling apart. His fighters were brave and determined, but they lacked the central command structure that had made the ambush possible. Chen, we're moving to Rodriguez's position, Morrison decided. Stay low and follow my lead. They burst out of the mosque together, Morrison laying down suppressing fire while Sarah sprinted toward Rodriguez's position. Bullets whined past them, some coming close enough that Sarah could feel the displaced air. Rodriguez saw them coming and provided covering fire, allowing them to slide behind the wall where he had taken shelter. The three SEALs were now together, but they were still trapped in the village with limited ammunition and no clear escape road. Thompson, we need an exit strategy, Morrison called to his sniper team. Working on it, boss. I can see a back alley behind your position that leads toward the canyon wall. It's not covered by the main defensive positions, but you'll be exposed for about 50 meters. 50 meters of open ground under fire was essentially a death sentence, but staying put was guaranteed death. Morrison made the decision quickly. Kim, can you create a diversion on the far side of the village? Something big enough to draw attention away from our escape route? Roger that, boss. I've got some surprises left. Kim began firing on the Taliban positions on the opposite side of the village, making each shot count. His precise marksmanship forced the fighters to take cover and redirected their attention away from Morrison's team. Now, Morrison shouted. The three SEALs broke cover and sprinted toward the alley Thompson had identified. Enemy fire erupted behind them, bullets striking the ground and walls around them. Rodriguez stumbled but kept running, a near miss having grazed his leg. They reached the alley just as Yasin's fighters realized what was happening. Shouts in Arabic echoed through the village as the Taliban tried to reposition their forces to cut off the Americans' escape. The alley was narrow and twisting, providing some cover but also limiting their movement speed. Sarah could hear boots pounding on the rooftops above them as fighters tried to get ahead of their position. Thompson, we're in the alley. Can you see us? Morrison asked. Negative, boss. Too many obstructions, but I can see fighters moving to intercept you at the far end, Morrison cursed. They were running out of options and ammunition. Even if they reached the canyon wall, they would still need to climb several hundred feet of rocky terrain while under fire. Boss, Rodriguez said, breathing hard from their sprint. I've got an idea. It's crazy, but it might work. Let's hear it, Morrison replied while checking his remaining ammunition. The climb up the canyon wall was treacherous under the best of circumstances. With enemy fighters closing in behind them and limited ammunition remaining, it became a desperate race against time and gravity. Morrison went first, his fingers finding holds in the rough limestone that had been carved by centuries of wind and weather. Sarah followed close behind, her smaller frame actually giving her an advantage on the technical sections of the climb. Rodriguez brought up the rear, his wounded leg making every movement painful but his determination unwavering. Movement in the alley below. Thompson's voice crackled through their earpieces. Looks like they found your trail. Morrison glanced down and saw muzzle flashes as Yasin's fighters entered the narrow passage they had just escaped. The Taliban were moving cautiously, expecting an ambush, but they were definitely following the right path. How much further to the cave? Rodriguez asked through gritted teeth. Blood was seeping through his pants where the bullet had grazed his thigh. About 20 more feet, Sarah replied, looking up at the dark opening that was their only hope of escape. Behind them, shouts in Arabic echoed off the canyon walls as the fighters spotted the climbing Americans. The first shots rang out, bullets spanging off the rock face around them and sending chips of limestone raining down. Morrison reached the cave entrance first and immediately took up a defensive position, providing covering fire for his teammates. The cave was deeper than it appeared from below. extending back into the mountain far enough that the rear sections disappeared into darkness. Sarah scrambled into the cave opening and immediately began exploring their new refuge. What she found gave her hope for the first time since the mission began. "Boss, this isn't just a cave. It's a tunnel. I can feel air movement coming from deeper inside." Morrison helped Rodriguez up the final few feet, while keeping one eye on the Taliban fighters, who were now attempting their own climb up the canyon wall. They were making good progress, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the cave entrance. "Thompson, Kim, what's your status?" Morrison asked as the three SEALs caught their breath in the relative safety of the cave. "We're still in position, boss," Thompson replied. "But we're starting to see movement on the ridges around us. Looks like they're trying to flank our position too." Morrison realized that Yassin's death hadn't ended the fight. His second-in-command was clearly competent and had quickly reorganized the remaining forces. The Taliban were now conducting a coordinated assault on both the cave position and the sniper team on the ridge. "Sarah, how far does this tunnel go?" Morrison asked urgently. Sarah had been exploring the passage and returned with encouraging news. "At least 100 meters, maybe more. And boss, I think it comes out on the other side of the ridge. The air current is definitely flowing from somewhere with a different temperature and humidity." Rodriguez was checking his equipment and ammunition. "Boss, I've got maybe 2 magazines left. How are you fixed?" Morrison did a quick inventory. "About the same. Sarah?" "1 magazine plus my sidearm," she replied. They were running dangerously low on ammunition, but the tunnel might give them the escape route they desperately needed. If it connected to the other side of the ridge, they could potentially circle around and link up with Thompson and Kim. "We move deeper into the tunnel," Morrison decided. "Rodriguez, can you travel?" "I can make it, boss. Leg's not that bad." The first Taliban fighter appeared at the cave entrance just as the SEALs disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Morrison left a small surprise behind. A fragmentation grenade with the pin pulled and the safety lever held down by a small rock. Anyone disturbing the rock would trigger an explosion that would, at minimum, discourage pursuit. The tunnel was ancient, probably carved by underground water flow over thousands of years. The walls were smooth limestone, and the floor was covered with fine sand that muffled their footsteps. Sarah led the way, using her small flashlight to navigate while Morrison and Rodriguez followed in single file. "Air current is getting stronger," Sarah reported. "We're definitely heading toward another opening." Behind them, they heard the muffled explosion as someone triggered Morrison's surprise. Angry shouts in Arabic echoed through the tunnel, but the sounds were growing fainter as they moved deeper into the mountain. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Sarah saw light ahead. Natural light, not the harsh glare of artificial illumination. "I can see the exit," she called back to the others. They emerged from the tunnel onto a narrow ledge on the backside of the ridge, almost exactly where Morrison had hoped they would. The view stretched across a different valley, one that wasn't filled with hostile fighters. "Thompson, Kim, this is Morrison. Do you copy?" "Roger, boss." "Where are you?" "We lost contact when you entered the cave. We're on the backside of the ridge about 200 meters south of your position. What's your situation?" "Not good, boss. They've got us pretty well surrounded. We can hold them off for a while, but we're going to need extraction soon." Morrison studied the terrain between their position and where Thompson and Kim were holding their sniper position. It was rocky and broken, offering good concealment but also making movement slow and difficult. "We're coming to you," Morrison decided. "Hold your position for 15 more minutes." The trek across the rocky terrain was exhausting, especially for Rodriguez with his wounded leg. But the three SEALs moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, each one covering the others as they bounded from one position to the next. They reached Thompson and Kim's position just as the Taliban fighters were beginning their final assault on the sniper team. The timing couldn't have been better. "Targets to the south," Morrison called out, taking up a firing position beside Thompson. The 5 SEALs formed a defensive perimeter and began engaging the Taliban fighters who were advancing up the ridge. Their combined firepower and superior training began to tell, forcing the attackers to take cover and reconsider their assault. In the distance, Morrison could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Their backup had finally arrived. "Alpha Team, this is Rescue 1, came a voice over their emergency frequency. "We have you in sight. Prepare for extraction." Two Apache attack helicopters appeared over the ridge, their chain guns already engaging Taliban positions in the valley below. Behind them came a Black Hawk transport helicopter, flying low and fast toward the SEALs' position. "Pop smoke," Morrison ordered, and Rodriguez threw a yellow smoke grenade to mark their location. The extraction was textbook perfect. The Black Hawk touched down just long enough for the 5 SEALs to scramble aboard, then lifted off and banked away from the valley as the Apaches continued to suppress enemy fire. As they flew away from the mountains, Sarah looked back at the village where so much had happened in such a short time. Yasin was dead, his network disrupted, and valuable intelligence had been gathered. But the cost had been high, and they had come closer to disaster than any of them cared to admit. "Good work, Chen," Morrison said over the helicopter's intercom. "That mirror signal saved all our lives." Sarah nodded, but she was already thinking about the next mission, the next challenge. That was the nature of their work. Success was measured not in celebration, but in survival, and the opportunity to fight another day. Rodriguez was receiving medical attention from the helicopter's medic, but he would be fine. Thompson and Kim were already planning improvements to their communication security protocols. Commander Yasin was dead, his reign of terror ended by American determination and superior training. But in these mountains, there would always be another enemy, another mission, another test of courage and skill. The SEAL team had walked into danger and emerged victorious, but they all knew it was only a matter of time before they would be called upon to do it again. That was their duty, their calling, and their burden. As the helicopters carried them back to base, each member of the team was already mentally preparing for whatever challenge would come next. In the war against terrorism, there was no final victory, only the next battle to be fought and won.